Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bedcrime Stories Podcast. I'm your host, T, and I hope you're doing well. Today, I want to talk about Jim Brenner. In the Dylan Rounds case, we true crime sleuths haven't been able to hear directly from law enforcement's number one suspect, Jim Brenner. We don't know what Brenner's voice sounds like. We don't really know what he looks like, aside from two grainy photos. The only people who seem to know Brenner to some degree are Montello local Kurt Wadsworth and a former boss of Brenner's. Brenner's ex-boss was interviewed on Salty Pancake's channel, and the portrait he provided of 59-year-old James Adrian Brenner was not a pretty one. According to this former boss, he hired Jim Brenner in 1993 in Maryland, and Brenner worked for him for about 2 years and 2 months. The business sounds like it was family-owned, possibly a farm, and there was a lot of heavy equipment work that was needed to be done. Brenner was hired to operate excavators and backhoes. The boss overseeing Jim Brenner did not own the company, and he said that Brenner's position was an under-the-table type of gig where Brenner was paid in cash, and that arrangement was at Brenner's request. Brenner told this guy that he couldn't fill out the paperwork, so the boss agreed with the caveat that he'd pay Brenner a lesser salary. As a convicted felon with an extensive rap sheet that includes convictions for violent felonies such as assault with intent to murder, malicious wounding, malicious shooting, and illegal possession of a firearm, Brenner likely encountered a lot of closed doors when he got out of prison and was trying to find a job. If you've been convicted of a violent felony, say armed robbery or worse, your chances of getting a normal job, and not even a good one, are pretty much slim to none. Ex-cons usually have to find a way to be self-employed. The only other solution is if, say, they're lucky enough to have a family member who has a business and who's willing to hire them. That's probably the best case scenario. If an ex-con has to take one of these under-the-table cash gigs from a stranger, then they're pretty much at the mercy of whoever is paying them. In that scenario, the boss or owner can simply decide one day that they aren't going to give the convicted felon employee their full wages, and the worker can't do squat. There's no human resources department to run to and to file a complaint with. I would say that Jim Brenner has had to live at the mercy of other people for a very long time. He's also had to be sort of scrappy and take other people's cast-offs. And with his, by all accounts, grumpy and combative personality and somewhat unambitious work ethic, Brenner likely couldn't keep a regular 9-to-5 job even if he could get one. I'm certain that his anger issues and resentment over people in power could only be controlled for so long. The ex-boss said that it took him a little while to figure out what Jim Brenner was really like because he only interacted with him on most days for about 10 minutes in the morning. He believes that Brenner was drinking every night because he'd turn up for work each day absolutely stinking of alcohol, as if the booze were seeping out of his pores. The boss stated that, like most people drink coffee in the morning to get revved for the day, Brenner instead drank a beer. What Brenner's ex-boss is describing is a functioning alcoholic, someone who's dependent on alcohol, but who can still function relatively effectively. The boss described finding out that Brenner was using his work truck, meaning the boss's work truck, over lunch to go to the local 7-Eleven, where he bought a pint of liquor and a 6-pack of beer. If all of this is true, you have to wonder what shape Jim Brenner's liver is in at this point in his life. He's 59, and he certainly doesn't look the picture of health from what we've seen. Symptoms of alcoholic liver cirrhosis typically develop when a person is between the ages of 30 and 40. A body can compensate for a liver's limited function in the early stages of the disease, but as the disease progresses, symptoms will become more noticeable and less tolerable. Of course, we don't know when exactly Brenner started abusing alcohol, but I suspect it's probably for many decades. I personally know 3 people who suffered the effects of decades-long alcoholism. Trigger warning, I'm going to describe symptoms of cirrhosis of the liver. 2 of the 3 people died in their 40s. One, who's now 61, has to manage his mostly destroyed liver every day. He lands in the hospital every so many months due to various symptoms of his mostly scarred liver. One is the painful accumulation of fluid in his abdomen. This is known as ascites. The fluid has to be removed from his body using a needle. This person has also coughed up blood due to esophageal varices. Esophageal varices are enlarged veins that develop in people with serious liver disease. They occur when normal blood flow to the liver is blocked by scar tissue in the liver. To go around the blockages, the blood flows into smaller blood vessels that aren't designed for such a large volume. The small vessels can then leak blood or even rupture. Long-term alcohol abuse pretty much spells disaster on a body. I'm talking about this because if Jim Brenner is the person who hurt Dylan Rounds, maybe he did so with the notion that he doesn't have much to lose. If you don't have much, you can't lose much, right? Brenner was already on the run from outstanding warrants, so there's that. Then he's living out in Lucin in someone else's abandoned trailer. He has a crappy car that overheats after 20 minutes, a horse that Kurt Wadsworth apparently bought him, and some firearms. We've seen photos of Dylan Rounds' trailer in Lucin, and I have to say, I don't think Brenner's freebie trailer was even as nice as Dylan's. None of the people living out there off the grid in abandoned trailers are living la dolce vita, the good life. No way. Even Dylan, who had the support of his grandparents and who was making good money doing custom farming for others, was having to rough it when he stayed out in Lucin. Brenner doesn't strike me as someone who worries about burning bridges with anyone, and we've heard from Kurt Wadsworth that Brenner is known for being a hothead and also somewhat lazy. There's no way that Jim Brenner can have adequate retirement funds in a bank somewhere. He's clearly dependent on Social Security disability monies and the goodwill of people who allow him to live in an old trailer on someone else's land. No one has come forward to advocate for Jim Brenner and say what a good person he is. We've heard Ty Corbin say that Don Hatley seems like a nice person who's genuinely broken up over Dylan's disappearance, but no one has said anything like that about Jim Brenner. When asked if he thinks Jim Brenner is capable of doing a person in, the boss replied yes. He pointed to Brenner's violent criminal record. The ex-boss also told Salty that he felt Brenner could easily dig a 10 to 12-foot hole in maybe 20 to 30 minutes, put someone or something in it, and then cover the hole back up in about 20 minutes. And I believe this is completely plausible. Kurt Wadsworth's daughter, Taylina, has said that she doesn't think Brenner has the smarts or physical prowess to pull this off alone. She pointed out that Brenner had a broken ankle earlier in the year. But I beg to differ. If Brenner had access to machinery that he knew how to start and drive, he could have used it for the heavy lifting parts of the crime. He wouldn't have had to even lift a body by himself. And he had plenty of time to do it in. He could have spent most of Saturday morning from, say, 7:30 a.m. until perhaps 2:30 p.m. doing the deeds. Or he could have hidden Dylan on Saturday and then done all the hiding and cleaning up work on Sunday. He may also have had his body's adrenaline to work off of, something that can give you a lot of energy when you find yourself in a crisis situation. The only complications Jim Brenner would have had to deal with were, 1, the weather. It was raining heavily starting in the afternoon on the Saturday when Dylan went missing, and it rained all day on Sunday. And 2, Don Hatley, who you may recall was contacted by Dylan's grandmother, Karen Rounds, and asked to check on Dylan at his farm. And it's possible Hatley called Brenner about this. He may have even asked Brenner to do the wellness checks solo because Brenner lived closer to Dylan's farm, and Hatley might have been busy preparing for his upcoming barbecue at his house that day. Note that according to Kurt Wadsworth, Jim Brenner told him that Dylan never called or texted him on Saturday morning to open the gate or to give him a ride back to his farm. Kurt told Brenner at that point that he thought he was lying about it, and I have to agree. Kurt then said he asked Brenner to see his phone, and Brenner said no. If that really happened, it doesn't make Brenner look innocent. But it's hard to believe Kurt Wadsworth because he's the one who threw out the whole abduction story, and he also made it sound like Candace Cooley could have hired people to harm her son. Wadsworth appears to have been hitting out at Candace because she was wary of him in the beginning and refused to talk to him. I believe it's definitely possible that Jim Brenner could have committed the crime solo and cleaned it all up by himself too. Think about it. He could have busted his butt over the hours he had alone that weekend. Some people have said that if Brenner did do away with Dylan Rounds all by himself, then he must have committed this type of crime before. They say this because whoever did away with Dylan has gotten away with it thus far, and Dylan hasn't been found. Brenner does display some of the common traits of a serial killer. I found these common traits listed under the title Serial Murder on the FBI's website. Brenner, for example, clearly displays antisocial behavior. He was living off the grid in a town that the cops aren't known to frequent. He may have also turned up at Don Hatley's barbecue, looking perfectly fine and showing no signs of having committed a heinous crime. Serial killers often lack remorse or guilt for their crimes. They are known to be impulsive, and they are also known to have a need to assert power. Brenner didn't have any real power, but he clearly wanted it, at least when it came to that gate. The gate is where we see Brenner desperately trying to assert some degree of power and agency. Per the ex-boss, Jim Brenner did not like taking orders from him because he was younger than Brenner. You see how this mirrors the dynamic between Dylan Rounds and Jim Brenner? A younger boss giving an older employee orders, and we've heard that Dylan could sometimes be condescending and a bit bossy. If I had to guess, I'd say Jim Brenner is someone who resents all authority figures, especially after his days in prison, a place where all you do is follow orders. But it sounds like he was especially worked up when the authority figure was younger than he was. I can easily see how 19-year-old Dylan barking orders at Brenner likely wouldn't have sat well with him. Maybe he said to himself on that rainy morning, "Eff it, I'm going to teach this young whippersnapper the lesson of a lifetime, something that will blow his mind for a split second and stop him dead in his tracks. He's going to see that I do have power, firepower." Back at the workplace in Maryland in 1995, Brenner's boss said he would buy a breakfast sandwich and orange juice every morning at the local 7-Eleven, pay for it in cash, and leave the change in his truck's console. He allowed the change to accumulate there over time, and it got up to around $150 to $200. Well, one Friday on his drive home, the boss opened the console, and he was shocked to discover that the money was all gone. But he knew right away who took it. The boss knew Brenner was the culprit because he'd been caught driving the boss's truck at lunchtime to get his own goodies at 7-Eleven, that pint of liquor and that 6-pack of beer. The boss ended up firing Brenner on the following Monday, and he docked his last paycheck for the $200. So Brenner clearly doesn't have any moral compass guiding him. He steals even from the people who are trying to help him. The ex-boss talked about Jim Brenner being charged in Maryland in 1986 with attempted murder and SA. Brenner seems to have snuck away to Utah because warrants for his arrest in Maryland are still floating out there. Per the boss, Brenner also got into a fight on the job with the boss's cousin, and Jim lost the battle. The boss said his cousin is not a drinker and not a brawler, so whatever Brenner said to the cousin set him off. Sounds like the same behavior Brenner exhibited in Montello. The bar fights, the fight in which he beat an elderly man with an aluminum lawn chair, getting into these physical fights but always losing them. The ex-boss also described an incident where Brenner fired a gun at the work site. The boss heard the shot, and when he came upon Brenner, Brenner told him that he shot a snake. That was when the boss discovered that Brenner came to work armed and ready to fire. Once the boss knew that Brenner had a firearm, he too started carrying one. The former boss's portrayal of Jim Brenner, as well as Kurt Wadsworth's input on Brenner, where he said Brenner was a hothead who got into bar fights on the regular, show that this dude is dangerous from every angle. And now, just yesterday, we have another voice chirping in about Jim Brenner. One of Doug of No Thanks Investigates subs, a lady named Brookie, has alleged that she had a virtual 30-minute visit with Jim Brenner. The question is, can we believe her? Some people are questioning the veracity of the story. Brookie claims she had this virtual visit at 4:10 p.m. Now, apparently, Brookie and Doug had said that they're going to record the visit, videotape it, and share it on his channel. But that didn't happen because she didn't show the receipts. She didn't show the video. And I doubt that the jail would have allowed her to do that. But let's imagine that Brookie really did visit Brenner. Here's what she said about it. Per Brookie, although Brenner was seated behind glass, Brookie said he looked to be about 5 feet 7 inches tall and to weigh about 250 pounds. That's taller than what other people have said about Brenner's height. And again, Brookie didn't take a picture of Brenner which would have proven that she saw him, so we don't know. Brookie said that Brenner was rather soft-spoken and appeared to be in poor health. Brenner allegedly told her that he feels that everyone is against him. Brookie also stated that she could tell that Brenner wanted to talk, but he was holding himself back, and that could have been because there were guards sitting near him. It could have been because he was telling himself, I can't trust this person. Who knows? So Brookie is saying that she didn't want to press Brenner because she's trying to warm him up to her, so to speak. Per Brookie, Brenner told her that Don Hatley picked him up on the Saturday Dylan vanished a little before 1 p.m. Per Kurt, remember, Brenner told him that he was at Hatley's barbecue from 1 to 5 p.m., but Hatley told Kurt that Brenner was at his barbecue from 3 to 9 p.m. So in what he said to Brookie, Brenner is sticking to his 1 p.m. timeline. So Brenner tells Brookie that after Don picked him up, they drove and looked around a little for Dylan before heading over to Don's house for the barbecue. Brookie also said that Brenner told her, "You're looking in the wrong directions," end quote. We'll have to interpret that ourselves because Brookie didn't fully explain what Brenner meant by that, and she didn't follow it up with a question to Brenner like, well then where should we be looking? Per Brookie, Jim Brenner is not tech savvy and he has no idea where searchers have been looking for Brenner. So I don't know how he could have said you're looking in the wrong directions if he also has no idea where people are looking. It sounds like Brookie was afraid to ask Brenner too many questions because she's trying to get him to trust her. And when PI Jim Terry tried to ask Brookie some of the hard questions about her visit with Brenner, Doug got mad at Terry and shielded Brookie from his delving questions. He basically put a stop to it. If Brookie really was allowed to have a meeting with Brenner, I'm nervous about having random people visit this guy and report about it. It's definitely fascinating to hear, but we don't want anyone jeopardizing the case if Jim Brenner is indeed the perpetrator. Until the next time on Bed Crime Stories. Now do me a favor, on your way out, smash that like button.